Thank you very much. That's carried. Now we come to number 12. Councillor Templeton, please. And you will be happy to move it, I assume?
I'm very happy to move it.
Yes, yep. And Councillor Coker would be happy to second it. Thank you. Carry on.
So I bring to you today the hearings panel report on the equity and inclusion policy. So the panel is recommending that we adopt this today. The proposed policy amalgamates 5 old community-facing policies that have been long overdue for review. The policies to be amalgamated cover youth, children, older persons, disabled community, and the broader social wellbeing policy. These policies have a lot of things in common. They focus on accesses to place, space, information, and participation. They note the Council's commitment to ensuring our services meet the needs of groups who may face disproportionate disadvantage in accessing our services and may not feel seen in decision making. And they reiterate the value that Council places on the contribution of a range of groups in our district. Proposed as a policy framework to replace these old policies. This is a high-level statement of intent and is meant to influence how and what Council activities are delivered, as well as influence other policy and strategy documents. The equity and inclusion policy facilitates an equity, access and inclusion lens being put across Council decision making. It also recognises the Council's responsibility to ensure that decision making reflects our commitment to foster equity and inclusion for all of our residents. The policy retains the principles and intent of the old policies and is well aligned with the Strengthening Communities Together strategy. It does not reflect a new policy direction for the Council. Consultation on the draft equity and inclusion policy ran from the 14th of September to the 3rd of October last year. We received 50 submissions on the draft policy, 3 community boards, 5 organisations and 42 individuals. A hearings panel made up of myself, Councillor Donovan and Councillor Harrison Hunt was convened on the 29th of November. There were 6 submitters who wished to be heard, and after listening to submitters we had some questions for staff, adjourned the hearing to allow staff time to prepare their responses, and reconvened and recommended it on the 11th of December. Submitters were generally supportive of the policy. Many suggested drafting changes, most of which were minor in nature. We're grateful for the feedback we received from the community and have accepted these inclusions where appropriate. The changes are outlined on section 4 of the report in front of you today. We're also recommending that the Council adopt the equity and inclusion policy in its final form as set out in attachment A. We also recommend the Council revoke the 5 policies and revoke 3 other community-facing policies which were reviewed as part of the project and are now obsolete: the community van, early childhood education and winning women charter policies. We also proposed 2 additional recommendations. We heard from submitters the importance of equitable access to information. Several submitters told us they often had difficulty navigating the Council website. Submitters also stressed the importance of the community having safe and inclusive ways to provide feedback to Council. We agreed it is important that we ensure that as a Council we provide safe, accessible and welcoming spaces for people to engage with us. We therefore have included a recommendation that Council prioritises a review of access to public community board and Council meeting rooms and processes to identify remaining barriers to inclusion and participation. We also recommend that Council consider whether additional budget is needed in the long-term plan to further enable participation. And I note the good alignment with the resident satisfaction survey with this today as well. And finally, I'd like to thank my fellow panel members for their time and thoughtful consideration of the report and submissions, and also the Council staff whose mahi on the policy and hearing have made our job so much easier. Ngā mihi nui kia koutou.
Okay, thank you very much for a clear and concise report. Thank you. I think it's so clear that we might not, of course we will. Councillor Johansson.
Yeah, I did put this question through ahead of the meeting, but I was in particular concerned around the revoking the children's policy and the youth policy. And then in the document, in the report, it says that they're incorporated into the new policy, but there's no specific reference to children or youth in it. So I was trying to understand from staff over how those 2 policies are actually incorporated into the new policy, because these are not ones that are just being straight revoked. These are ones that have been incorporated. And also the second kind of question was specifically around the children's policy, given that we've signed up to be a child-friendly city. And one of the requirements, as I understand it, is we do have a children's strategy /policy. I'm just concerned to know what the implications would be around that.
Can you answer that, Sarah, please?
I can answer some of it, but some of that will be for staff. So while children specifically aren't mentioned, the report, the policy does talk about age and different age groups. It is difficult to start listing all of the groups that you want to feel are included as part of our society and the work that we do in council. One of the problems with that is once you start identifying every individual group, if you've got a list of them and you have missed one or two, then people will assume that you've specifically excluded them. And so that could be a risk with doing all of it. I do see the potential, if council were of a mind, to potentially outline in one of the paragraphs maybe that there are some age groups that are more disadvantaged than others, and for example children and youth, but I think that the best process if you wanted to do that would be just to send it back briefly to the hearings panel, so that we can get advice from staff as to where that would be included rather than wordsmithing, adding the word children in, if that makes sense.
The other.
Okay, do you want us to ask some questions? Because I'm under the impression that we've got rid of, we've removed some, got rid of, and nothing has been left behind, and we're certainly no worse off. We're far better off than we were prior. That's the impression I just got, and from what I've read.
So the children and the youth policy are both quite high-level policies. Youth policy is a sentence, and then the children's policy is 3 sentences. And they talk about the value that council places on those groups and making sure that our services and policies and planning reflects their needs and then includes them in decision making. So the principles of those policies are incorporated into the new equity and inclusion policy. The principles of those policies are also picked up in the Strengthening Communities Together strategy, which identifies specific actions for youth and children, and we included an implementation section in this policy that references the Strengthening Communities Together program of work, and we believe that that program of work is where we're best placed to drive outcomes for those groups.
Okay, good answer. Thank you. Any more questions? We'll go into debate. Councillor Keown.
Yeah, so I think everyone probably received the email. I got 2 different ones. One on the inclusion of the word sex in there, and we are not. And can we? And if we're not, why are we not? Because they seem to make a reasonable case in this.
I'll just do a high-level answer before passing it to staff, and I think we did receive an extra piece of information as well that the panel received. Just that we have to remember that this is a policy that is not new policy, and our existing work as a council uses gender rather than sex, and so changing that would be a new thing for council, and we weren't doing new stuff as a high level.
Right.
But when it comes to the legality of things and the questions over the Human Rights Act, it's best to talk to the lawyers.
Right, but isn't when you redo the policy the time to change it if it's not correct?
If I could assist, we took legal advice on this specifically, as we have done over the last many months in relation to the wording of sex and gender. And the advice that came back was using the word gender rather than sex doesn't infringe against either the Bill of Rights or the Human Rights Act, and more the point was made that the words sex and gender, particularly in the context of the Human Rights Act, are in fact used interchangeably, and that by using the word gender, we're not excluding the word sex. So the word gender and the legal advice that came back from us, which is in accordance with an opinion that came from the Crown Law Office, one encompasses the other.
Thank you very much. That's good. Can we move on, please?
I have to say, from the hearings panel, that this was a key thing that came up both in submissions and at the hearings, and it was one of the key reasons that we adjourned the panel so that we could seek further advice. That advice came back, the hearings panel considered it and decided to leave the policy as it was.
Mm-hmm. Was the consideration given to having both gender/sex?
Consideration was given to the thing as a whole, and we decided to leave it as it was.
Okay, that's cool. Righto, Councillor Fields, please.
So I haven't seen it in the report, so just humour me. But how do we know how well the policy is performing as as something that we operate with? Like, is it what's the review process look like? That sort of thing. When do we review it? And how do we sort of measure that?
So there's an implementation section that's been added that talks about the Strengthening Communities Together program of work, leading the monitoring, reporting and implementation of this policy. So it'll be picked up with staff who are working within that program of work.
Good one, thank you. Councillor Donovan?
This is a follow-up to Councillor Johansson's question, which I thought was a good one. In terms of identifying particular groups such as children, is there a risk that the policy might be too general and not pick up on some specific? So I'm wondering if there is still an opportunity to get staff advice on a list of groups, including children, just to come back to the hearings panel.
Yeah, so we did consider listing groups in an initial draft of this policy and considered that it would be exclusionary and that we might be othering people if we didn't do that. So that's why we have that sort of broad sentence of regardless of age, gender, etc.
Okay. Thank you very much. No, we've heard a lot of positive comments. We've got a mover and seconder. Is there any debate, please? Councillor Johansson.
Yeah, can I move an amendment to seek advice? So just an additional resolution is to seek advice on the policies that are incorporated into the new policy around being specifically referred to. We do actually, if you look at on page 605, and I'm sure you've all read it, we do actually talk about people with disabilities. So, it seems to me, in particular, that around the children and the youth, that there's no harm in making reference to those groups. But I certainly don't want to speak on behalf of the panel and try and wordsmith it today. But I think actually it would be quite useful to get an option where we could, if we wanted to, consider that. For me, I feel very uncomfortable revoking the children's policy and the youth policy without knowing specifically that there is reference to those within here, particularly because the document itself does say that these are not policies that are just revoked, these are policies that are incorporated in.
Have you got a seconder? Can we do that? No, you did right.
You can move an amendment and debate.
I think that the process-wise, getting advice on making a change to the policy after it's already a policy would mean actually reconsulting on it would be a whole new review. Mm-hmm. Rather than, you could do a foreshadowed motion to send it back to the hearings panel for that. But if you're just asking for advice after it was passed, then we'd have to review the policy as a whole and consult.
Sorry, before we go any further, am I clear that you've encompassed all of those old policies into the new one and nothing has been chopped? Yeah. So we've got what we always had. You guys have just done some housekeeping to make things a lot more clear.
If you read the policy, the disability groups are referenced in it. The children and youth are not. That is a key change.
Okay.
So what's the amendment you're wanting to make?
To just have a very high-level reference to this policy, picking up on supporting young people and children in our city, right? So if you look at the inclusion, and I'm sure you've all read it.
If you can you put forward your actual amendment so
we can
put it up?
Annie, which disabilities are mentioned specifically?
So there is
do we need to have a few
inclusion, mental
We're
disabilities.
in debate at the moment.
Yeah.
So in debate, you
Physical.
probably do just need to debate it and put forward your actual amendment, and then.
But you can't amend the hearings panel recommendation.
Well, we don't know what the amendment is yet.
Yeah.
I don't think it's
Well-
an entire review. Or from what I'm picking up, he
Entire
just
review.
wants
Shall
to.
we-
Simply adding two words.
Yeah.
Well, give us 5 minutes and we'll sort it out.